The hidden truth about athletes' height. Every advantage has a cost. The undersized advantage. If you're on the shorter side for your sport, you've probably heard this before. You're quick, you're agile, you make up for it, which sounds like a compliment. But it's actually a category, because in sports, height doesn't just affect performance, it shapes expectation. Before you even touch the ball, people have already adjusted how they're going to evaluate you. Less margin, less patience, less assumed dominance, more scrutiny. Shorter athletes get filtered into one lane: speed, control, precision, not power, not physical authority. And that changes how you're developed. You get different reps, different roles, different ceilings, whether anyone says it out loud or not. But here's where it flips, because when the system doesn't expect you to dominate, you're forced to understand it earlier. Your margin for error is smaller, so your timing gets tighter. Your decisions get faster. Your control gets cleaner. You can't rely on reach. You can't rely on size. So you rely on reading, angles, timing, intent. You're not reacting to the play, you're predicting it well before anyone else. Which is why this profile shows up in gymnastics, soccer midfield, point guard play, lower weight classes in combat sports. You don't just move fast, you adjust fast. But there's a trade-off, because while you gain precision, you lose forgiveness. Mistakes cost more. You get contested earlier. You get questioned faster. You get underestimated consistently. Which sounds like a disadvantage, until you realize what it builds: adaptability. You learn to read movement earlier. You anticipate instead of react. You create space instead of waiting for it. So while taller athletes often play above the system, you learn how to play inside it. And once you can do that, you're adapting to the game earlier than everyone else. The compact controller. If you're slightly below average for your position, you don't get labeled immediately. You're not too small, but you're also not the build. So the brain does something interesting. It delays judgment. Instead of deciding what you are, it watches closely. And that creates pressure, because when people don't know what to expect, they pay more attention. Every movement gets evaluated. Your balance, your positioning, your control under contact. There's no shortcut here. No built-in advantage, no built-in excuse. Just real-time judgment. Which sounds fair. It's not. Because when nothing is assumed, everything becomes your responsibility. But that pressure shapes you into something very specific. An athlete built on mechanics, leverage, positioning, efficiency. You're not overpowering people, you're out-positioning them. Which is why this build shows up in running backs, wrestlers, infielders, hockey players with elite edge control. Sports where being hard to move matters more than being hard to see. Lower center of gravity improves stability. Compact frames absorb force better. Movement stays tight and repeatable. You don't waste motion. You don't have enough extra motion to waste. But here's the trade-off. Because nothing about your build demands attention, so if your technique slips, there's nothing there to hide it. No reach, no size buffer. You either look controlled or you don't, immediately. But the upside? Control. When your mechanics are clean, you're extremely difficult to disrupt. Because you're not relying on advantage, you're relying on positioning that holds under pressure. And that kind of control translates anywhere. The neutral build. If you fall right around average for your sport, you don't stand out. And more importantly, your height doesn't explain anything about you. Which sounds like an advantage. It's not. Because the brain uses shortcuts. Too small? Compensate. Very tall? Assume dominance. But when you fall in the middle, there's no shortcut. So the brain shifts focus entirely onto your behavior. Immediately. Your posture, your confidence, your decisiveness. There's nothing else to anchor to. Which means you don't get extra credit. But you don't get discounted either. Everything is earned in real time. Which sounds fair. It's not. Because when nothing stands out, you're easier to ignore. Until you give people a reason not to. This is why this build shows up everywhere. Soccer players across multiple roles. Baseball players in nearly every position. MMA fighters with mixed styles. You're not defined by structure, you're defined by execution. But here's the trade-off. Because when nothing carries you, Nothing saves you either. No fallback explanation, no built-in narrative, just results, which creates pressure, consistency. But it also creates something else, flexibility. You're not locked into a role. You're not boxed into expectations. You can shape how you're perceived, which means while other athletes inherit assumptions, you build them from scratch. The prototype athlete. If you fit what most people picture as the ideal build for your sport, you start to look like the model, not just to people, to the system. Because most sports have an unspoken template, and when you match it, you get evaluated differently before you prove anything. More upside, more projection, more patience. Mistakes look like potential, not limitation, because the brain is filling in the gaps in your favor. You haven't done it yet, but it looks like you should be able to, which is why this build shows up in NBA wings, NFL wide receivers, elite swimmers, tennis players, athletes who look like they belong. But here's the trade-off, because when you look like the prototype, expectations come with it. You don't get judged against average, you get judged against what you should be. If you hesitate, it stands out. If you underperform, it's obvious, even if no one says it, which creates pressure, not to be good, but to match your build. But the advantage? Speed. You don't have to fight for belief, you start with it. And when you combine that with real skill, progress compounds faster. The outlier advantage. If you're on the taller side for your role, you don't blend in. You change the environment. Before the play even starts, your presence is already affecting decisions. Spacing shifts, angles adjust, people hesitate, because size signals reach and risk. So people play differently around you, which is an advantage. You don't have to earn attention, you start with it. Which is why this build dominates in basketball centers, volleyball blockers, goalies, pitchers. You control space. But there's a trade-off. Because what you gain in reach, you lose in adjustment speed, slower acceleration, longer recovery, more mechanical stress. Your size gives you range, but it also gives you inertia, and inertia doesn't like sudden change. So your effectiveness becomes situational, dominant in the right conditions, exposed in the wrong ones. There's also expectation. You don't get credit for being big, you get questioned when you don't use it. But the advantage? Control. You don't chase the play, you shape it. The extreme outlier. If you're well beyond what's typical height for your sport, you're rare. And the brain treats rare things differently. It pays attention immediately. Before the game even starts, you're already part of the story. People notice you, they remember you. Not just because of performance, but because of what you represent. Extreme size signals something unusual. And the brain doesn't leave unusual things neutral. It assigns meaning. Sometimes accurate, sometimes not. But it sticks anyway, which means you're not just playing, you're being interpreted, constantly. This is why this build shows up in 7-foot basketball players, elite rowers, strongman athletes, Olympic throwers. Physically, the advantages are obvious, but so are the constraints. Higher stress, higher demands, lower forgiveness. But the biggest shift isn't physical, it's psychological. Because when you stand out this much, people react to expectations before reality. The advantage? You never fight for attention. The trade-off? You never fully control how people perceive you. So height in sports isn't just about advantage, it's about assignment. Psychologically, before you ever develop your game, your build starts shaping how you're used, how you're coached, and how you're evaluated. None of that is random, it's pattern recognition. The brain simplifying what it sees before it has enough information. And over time, those patterns become roles. But roles aren't fixed, they're just repeated expectations. Because the real advantage isn't your height, it's understanding what your height makes people assume and deciding what you do with that. Some athletes fight their build, some rely on it. But the ones who understand it, use it, to their benefit. They know when to lean into it, when to override it, when to break the expectations completely. Because once you see the pattern, you stop reacting to it and start working with it. So now I'm curious, which one did you fall into? And if you're seeing this now, subscribe, because once you notice it, you start seeing it everywhere.